In this section, we are going to cover vCloud Air networking, and it is a really important thing to understand how networking works in vCloud Air because we need to be able to make it work for our situation. So, how gateways work, how routed network work, and isolated networks, and so on are the topics we are going to cover in this section. We will whiteboard to some degree, and then we will do a very short networking lab so that you have a good grounding in these concepts. In the next two sections, we are going to cover vCloud Director, both basic and advanced. And the reason I bring it up at this point in time is because behind the scenes, vCloud Air uses vCloud Director, as we've said many times. The concepts that are visible to you and the constructs that are visible to you in vCloud Air are obviously first the organization. So when you sign up for an account, you are given an organization, and we will explore the organization in the lab. It has a unique UUID, but then there is a human readable ID that you can set up as well, and we'll see where that is done. Within an organization, you can have multiple virtual data centers. By default, when the organization is set up, in vCloud Air, there is one virtual data center that is created for you, and that is named VDC1. It simply is again a logical construct. If it's an on-demand account that you have, then obviously anything that's running in your workloads are charged based on the usage. In the other two cases, if it's a private cloud or a dedicated cloud, you are charged based again on usage, or otherwise based on the dedicated cloud. If it's dedicated to you, then of course you're charged for the entire infrastructure. But again, the virtual data center is where one actually creates the virtual machines. Now you can see this is quite different from looking at things in vSphere, because of course behind the scenes, right at the very back end, are vCenter and vSphere clusters and distributed switches and so on and so forth. Right, and we'll just briefly cover one more time exactly how this works, although we've done that in some way a little bit earlier as well. So once you have the virtual data center, and that's VDC1 is your default data center that's given to you, within that there is a default routed network that's also created when the organization is created and the virtual data center is created when you sign up for the account. So when you are looking at what is the routed network, when you're looking at the routed network, you will see that it is connected to a gateway. So at one end, one of the interfaces, the gateway, is connected to the external network, and actually that's a term from vCloud Director. All that it means is that the external network is the public side of the gateway, and think of it as the internet. So there's a public address assigned to it, and then on the other interfaces, and there are 9 other interfaces available on a gateway, and there are 9 plus the one external always, and that is simply because it's a virtual machine, and a VMware virtual machine can have 10 virtual NICs. So one virtual NIC is taken up by the external network. The next one, which is NIC 1, is taken up by the default routed network that is provided to you automatically. An isolated network is not provided initially to you. All it means is that you have the ability to create a network which is not connected to any gateway. So you can connect various vApps and virtual machines to that isolated network, and there is no access to it from the outside. So getting to it is either by using a port forwarding after connecting it to an organization routed network, or you actually log into the consoles and you operate from that basis. You can also set up jump boxes. So these are all standard techniques that I'm sure you are all familiar with. I will mention them one more time. We probably won't cover these in this course because the focus is on the networking aspect of it, and really in most cases one uses routed networks most of the time. Then we have the ability to create new networks in VDCs. As I said, initially you get one routed network. Its name is the default routed network. You can create new networks, and you can have new private addresses there as well, and connect them up to the gateway on the other side, and then you're able to keep things separated for all kinds of production reasons. Uh, we've talked about this briefly, the networking setup in a new VDC, and in the lab we'll see if we have an opportunity to actually create a new VDC and see what networking setup is actually created. But really, basics, there is a gateway that's created for you and a default routed network with a 192.168 dot address that's created. Of course, the very first routed network has the dot 109 address, but then it'll be different when you actually move. As soon, when it will be 109 in a new VDC, but then you have the ability to actually create a new network 110 and so on. So with that, we are actually going to proceed to first the whiteboard for a brief session to sketch this out so that you have a visual idea of what this looks like, and then we are going to move to the vCloud Air networking lab to actually show you all these constructs. We are now at the whiteboard, and let me sketch out for you first of all how vCloud Air hooks into or is actually based upon vCloud Director, and how everything else is based upon vSphere. We've done this once before, so I will draw this in a slightly different manner this time, just to emphasize that point. For me, to get a real good understanding of vCloud Air, it's really critical to be able to understand that. So we'll draw it in layers. So at the top is vCloud Air, and we have seen an interface for this many times. vCloud Air is based upon vCloud Director. As we know, vCloud Director is the cloud provider platform for their cloud services. So it is basically a cloud management platform, and we've seen its interface many times as well. And then right at the bottom, so to speak, would be the vSphere virtual infrastructure, which obviously comprises of vCenters, one or many, probably usually many in a production environment. You have many clusters, and then you have storage, you have switches, they're usually VDSs, etc. So you have all these. So when we are actually working on the vCloud Air interface, what is happening is that the interface is actually sending API calls, API REST calls, REST being representational state transfer calls to vCloud Director. And in turn, vCloud Director sends APIs calls, which is, it's a slightly old API from vSphere, so it's pretty sure it's SOAP XML, and it sends APIs over to the vSphere virtual infrastructure via vCenter usually, and then vCenter does its thing in terms of providing what's needed. So for example, when you create a new virtual machine here, an API thing goes in here, API call goes into vCloud Director, it treats it as a virtual app, a vApp, the vCloud Director version of the vApp, and then sends an API call down to here, and that provides you the actual virtual machine provisioning that's necessary up here in the vSphere virtual infrastructure. Okay, so with that, we will now move into vCloud Air networking. But before we go there, let's just take one more quick look. Since we're going to talk about networking, there is the Air visualization of the networking. So there's the Air version of the network. Then of course we have the vCloud Director version of the network, and then of course we have the vSphere version of the network. Now this may all sound really complicated, but don't worry about it. In vCloud Air, we only talk about, as we said before, we only talk about organizations, org. We talk about organizational virtual data centers, and we talk about gateways and networks. That's it. We don't worry about all this other stuff that is out there. So what we are going to focus in now, I'm going to change colors here. We are actually going to see what it is that we get when we are in vCloud Air. we are not going to look at this or look at this at this point in time. These are topics we're going to cover in the next two sections, where I will talk about vCloud Director Basics and vCloud Director Advanced, where we will go into much more depth. Okay, so we are now going to go and whiteboard the vCloud Air networking, and after that's done, we are going to switch to the lab. So I am going to remove this ink, and we are going to start afresh with the red color. So we are going to talk about vCloud Air networking. So when you get an account, so let's see, new account, you get a new organization. This organization has it's a logical construct. You get a UUID basically with that. Now from that organization, you can, from this one organization, you can have 1 to n, so 1 to many VDCs, virtual data centers, which are called VDCs. Now you get first VDC is created for you, and its name is VDC1 in vCloud Air. So you get this VDC automatically. You can obviously add more VDCs. Okay, so you can add more VDCs, virtual data centers, to your organization, because it's a one to many. Now for a VDC, so when you get your first network that's created for you, when the VDC is created for you, the first network is actually called default. Well, there's actually a gateway that comes first. So gateway, there's a gateway that's created for you, and that is called the default gateway, and this is a 1:1. So for every VDC you are given one gateway. Now of course remember we are backed up by vCloud Director, so if you have access or you have the dedicated cloud or the multi-tenant cloud option, you should be able to create many more gateways rather than the one gateway that we get with the on-demand account. But we get one gateway in this on demand account. Now in this gateway, by default we get the first network, and that's a default routed network, and it looks like the private addresses in that network are 192.168.109.0/24. They are in that range. Okay, and the gateway address for that network is 192.168.109.1. Okay, so let's just recap. New account, you get a new organization. It's a UUI, and you get a UUID for that. That's how it is distinguished in vCloud Air from all the other organizations that are out there. You have a one-to-many construct that's available for the virtual data centers that are in there. However, vCloud Air gives you your first data center, which is called VDC1. In that first data center, they give you a gateway, so it's a 1-to-1 in the on-demand account. And within the gateway, they create for you a default routed network, which is your first network. You can create more networks as well. You cannot create new gateways on the on-demand. So, and we've seen that earlier as well. So first network is the default routed network, and then you can add with the plus sign. You can add more networks, and you can give it other private addresses, private IP addresses. Okay, so let's look at this from a visual perspective. So I am going to delete this, and we're going to start again whiteboarding now this from a visual perspective. So you have the org, and it has a UUID. Initially there is a gateway, your default gateway that's created. So there is a gateway that's created. So you have an org created, you have a gateway created. In the gateway, you have one, two, three, four. Pause. We are going to start now diagramming the first implementation again from a visual perspective. So you get a new organization. In the new organization, you get a VDC, virtual data center, which is VDC1. In there, you get a gateway, which kind of looks like this. So you have your external network, which is public. Attached to that is your gateway. This is a public address. What you then get is your routed, it's called the default routed network, with the initial range of 192.168.109.0/24. So coming out of that, you have your 192.168.109.0/24 network. So that's basically what you get. And the address up here, this address here, your gateway address is .1, so that the range here, okay, your range is 192.168.109.2 through 192.168.109. I believe they leave it at 253. Not exactly sure why, but we can verify this. Okay, so this template, we'll change colors here. So this template is what's created for you. So you have an org, you get one VDC that's called VDC1, you get a gateway, and you get this networking setup. You get this networking setup in your VDC. When you create a new VDC, you can, let's just leave it as VDC2, and you have the ability to do that. If you create a new VDC2, initially the same thing happens. You get a gateway, and you get the public external network, right? You get your gateway, and then you get your routed network. And it also has the same 192.168.109.0.24 network. They are in separate VDCs, and this public IP is different. So this is public IP number 2. This is public IP, let's say number 1. So they are different. So obviously you can with a static route, for example, you can set up connections between this. Usually you're able to NAT. So they are independent entities in many ways. So with this background, I should have given you a flavor for what to expect in the lab. We will explore this. Keep a lookout for this 192.168.109.0. Again, you may ask, well, why is it that? Well, that's the way vCloud Air is templated to give it to you. And we'll see if we can change this or not. We will then go through, look at some new networks and so on, and just kind of explore this so that you are completely familiar with vCloud Air networking. So we are back again in vCloud Air, and as you can see, if I go to my home page, and you see the standard, and I look at my services up here, and I am then able to get the list of virtual data centers. It's a little bit slow sometimes, but not too bad. And so here we are. So as you can see, I have two VDCs that are available here. INE VDC2, which is what we've been using for most of our classes here, and VDC1 is the initial one, and I really have not done much to it at all. I've just left it alone because it tells me that I still need to create my first virtual machine in it. But that was the initial VDC1 we talked about on when we were whiteboarding. That's created by default. This is one that I created by myself. Now what you have to do is you have to go up here to the plus sign if you want to add a new VDC. So let's just walk through the process, and we call it INE VDC3. Now this part is really interesting, the capacity limit. So again, this is templated. This is the way VMware's vCloud Air service for on demand has configured the vCloud director behind it so that I can, in this VDC, create a maximum of 50 virtual machines. The max I can basically use of virtual CPU is 130 gigahertz, which is quite a bit. 100 gig of virtual RAM, so to speak. This is old VMware terminology for those that have gone through this for some time, but let's just say 100 gig of RAM is available, 2 terabytes of standard storage, 2 terabytes of SSD, and obviously you've seen the charge is a little bit more for SSD. And in this region, which is the Virginia region, I can create a maximum of 4 data centers, which is quite a bit, and it says 2 used, which is correct because it's VDC1 and INE VDC2, and now we are creating the third one. Now if you require additional capacity, you contact VMware support. They'd be more than happy to do this, but this is plenty for us and for most purposes, to be honest. And that really is all there is to be done when to actually create a new virtual data center. So we will just click on create a virtual data center, and we will probably have to wait for some time before we are able to see it. Now in the meantime, what we can do is we can explore INE VDC2, and we can explore the gateway. And again, if you could look back and think back to the whiteboarding that we did, that's your gateway IP, and that's connected to the external network. That's your public IP address, and it has 2 networks that are behind it, right? And there are 2 other public IPs apart from the default IPs, and I put them up there. You can then look at the networks that are behind it, and this was the default network that was created. And as you can see, the IP range initially allocated to it was 192.168.109.2, right? This is always what happens. And then when I created a new network by clicking on this, and we'll do this in just 1 minute, I created an INE routed network, and I connected it to the same gateway, but gave it a completely different private IP range. Okay. One key thing here, because we did talk about it, by default, in the default routed network, .1 becomes the gateway IP in that network, and then the IP range available is 109.2, and so on. So that when you start up virtual machines and you connect their NICs to the default routed network, the first unused address in the static IP pool is actually used, because normally one uses a static IP pool option in the virtual machine, although it does not have to be so. You can actually set up DHCP, and we will see that in a separate section much later on. But usually static IPs from the static IP pool are good, because when the machine is restarted, you get the same address. Okay, so let's just click on this and see what it looks like. Okay, so the network name is default routed network. Presumably you can change that. Let's leave that alone. This is the interesting part. You can change the IP range of the default routed network as well to suit yourself. But again, I'm really don't want to make this change at this point in time, because there are too many different virtual machines I have running, and VPNs and so on, so I don't really want to make any changes here. But the interesting part is that you can actually look at the last address they gave you. It's 253, which is fine. And there's a gateway to route through, and the gateway address is there, and this is the gateway address. This is this address. Okay, so I'm not actually going to go any further in this, because I don't really want to foul up anything. What we are going to do is, instead, we are going to click on plus, add a new network. Okay, and we are going to call this network INE routed network 2. So here we have INE routed network 2. I can give it a description, and we will give it a different IP range. Let's make it 192.168.209.2. There's a reason for that, which is obviously address assigned to the gateway. So this is like the pool that we are creating for it. 192.168.209.253. I'll stay with the convention that they have here. Subnet mask is a 24-bit mask, so it's 255.255.255.0. Okay, we have a gateway we'll route through. There's only one gateway available. Obviously, this option was set up so if you have multiple gateways, then you can select the gateway that you are going to connect to. But in our case, well, there's only one gateway, and then the gateway address that we have to provide there, 192.168.209.1. Again, we are following the convention here. So I click on add network, and it is doing its thing. And we should very soon have another network that is available to us. And here we are. We have INE routed network 2 on that same VDC, INE VDC 2. It's routed, that same gateway address, and we have the 209.1. No VMs are connected to it, 3 public IPs because it's connected to the same gateway, and of course we have that IP range. We did not provide it with a description. Now it is easy enough to actually just delete this as well. So let's just decide not to do that at this point in time, and instead let's focus on looking at this new network that we've created in vCloud Director. So I just click on Manage in vCloud Director, and we are going to go here, and it brings me to this, right? So here we have the 3 networks in this case, and this is our new INE routed network 2. So I click on this, and then I select it. I configure the services on this network. You can see what that does here. As we can see, what happens is that it brings you to configuring the services on the gateway that it is actually connected to: DHCP, NAT, firewall, static routing, VPN, and load balancer. So we're not interested in actually configuring the gateway there, because we have a separate section for each one of these, for load balancer, VPN, static routing, firewall, NAT, and DHCP. So we are actually going to cancel out of that. The other options available to us in this are the IP allocations. This is in the vCloud Directory interface, and you can see there's it's a virtual machine. That's the gateway vShield edge, and the IP address range is 192.168.209.1, which is exactly what we had actually put in. So not much use, frankly. Connected vApps. Obviously, we have not connected any virtual apps to it, but we could take a virtual app, connect its NIC, and when there's a drop down, and you select one of these 3 options. Let's look at the properties for this as soon as this comes up. So again, it has a name, the network specifications. Now this is actually pretty interesting, because it in the on-demand, it doesn't, at least from what I can see at this point in time, doesn't really fit. You can do a DNS relay. However, I don't really have access to configuring much on the DNS on the gateway as far as I can remember. So it becomes a little bit difficult to do, but we will try one more time just to be sure that I'm certain about this. But I had some issues with the DNS, and so what I actually did was I set up DNS within the virtual machines themselves. I used 8.8.8 right within the configurations of the CentOS, and I got around everything that way. Metadata text. So just be on the lookout for the DNS. I mean, I can put in 8.8.8.8, and my secondary could be the 8.8.4.4. Thank you, Google. And not going to change the pool. You can add more pools if you like, and they don't have to be contiguous. They can be not discontiguous, but well, they can be discontiguous in the sense that they cannot be overlapping, of course, so they are discontiguous. But you can take segments of it. So you can make it from like 209.2 to 209.10, and then 209.100 to say 110, and that leaves you enough for a DHCP allocation by the gateway if that's necessary. So I'll just click on OK up here, and this is again changes to DNS will not be automatically applied to DHCP because DHCP could provide you with your DNS settings as well. So you need to redeploy the edge gateway and so on. And this is all standard networking stuff. So I changed the DNS settings here. So what they're saying is this will not be automatically applied to the DHCP configuration. So I've changed these settings. So I must make some change to DHCP configuration in order to cause DHCP to be reapplied, right? And there are different ways of actually doing that, and we can take a look possibly at one of those. Okay, so it's updating the network because we changed the DNS settings there. Okay, one could look at the edge gateway, and this will show when we look at the edge when we look at the properties of this the edge gateway name and stuff. As soon as this ungrays itself, you can see that you can configure IP settings up here. You can change IP assignments, except with on demand you can't do that. So I have my public IP address that's up there. These are the various subnets in VMware Air which I don't have access to, but these are your external networks that Virginia region is connected to. You can again, this is an external network. I don't have a choice here. I can't choose because it doesn't allow me to because I'm an on-demand customer. But if I was a different type of customer, I could actually choose networks, which means that I could because if I was not a non-demand customer, I could create multiple gateways. I could connect on the external side to the internet. I can connect each gateway to a completely separate external network, which is really the right way to actually do it. So all those things are actually possible in doing this. Rate limits, they are not enabled. The incoming rate is 100 megabits and outgoing is 100 megabits. I can enable this, okay, but it won't let me change it. Okay, so again, this is part of the way that the service of on-demand is configured by vCloud Air for us. It won't let me do syslog either, which is sometimes a very nice thing to be able to do. I cannot also enable high availability. Again, this option has been grayed out for me, so there's no automatic failover to a backup edge gateway. So again, if you're doing real important production work, then you would probably not have an on-demand kind of an account. You would probably have the multi-tenant or the dedicated cloud account, which would then allow you to have multiple gateways and then connect them to multiple networks. So we're going to basically haven't changed anything, just kind of okay out of this, and so there we are. So we have covered most of the things we talked about in the slide that we had for vCloud Air networking. And also I think by looking through what we have seen here, you probably have a good idea of what it is that this actually looks like in real life. We looked at organizations. So when I go into this vCloud Director interface in the administration tab, basically these are the virtual data centers that I have here. These are cloud resources, and I look at the general settings. Okay, this is where the UUID. So this is the hexadecimal UUID that has been given to my organization, to my account. Okay, I can actually come into this or log into this through the default organization URL. Basically, it is the VMware Virginia region. This is automatic in vCloud Director, compute cloud org, and then that's the organization. So different people have different organizations, so you are able to go directly in there as well. Usually I change the name from this hexadecimal name to a human readable name, INE course organization. In the organization, there are other things that can be changed and some that cannot be changed. So in the on-demand, it says use the system default SMTP server, but this is grayed out, so I cannot set an organization SMTP server. I have seen other implementations of cloud that are based on vCloud Director that actually allow you to set the organization SMTP server. So this is simply something that has been decided by VMware vCloud Air not to be able to do for on-demand customers. I'm sure it's allowed for the other multi-tenant or the dedicated cloud customers. Same thing for the notification settings. For the on-demand, I cannot really change notification. It would be nice if I could set organization notification settings so that I could have an address, and some things that are pertinent to my organization. Right now, it basically goes only to VMware themselves. So there's nothing else I can do in the on-demand version. So it is a little bit limited in terms of this here. Again, I've seen some other implementations based on vCloud Director that actually allow you to set this even in an on-demand environment. Okay. The policies we looked at. So if you have a situation where you have a virtual machine that is running and you want to run it in a test, so you're going to be testing for the next say 8 hours, you could set up the lease in such a way so that the virtual machine basically runs for 8 hours and then is stopped so that you don't pay for it or the resources it is using. Right now everything is set to maximum runtime lease. That means how long apps can run before they are stopped. It never expires. However, I can set it to 6 hours. So it's 1, 6, 12, and 18. It's every 6 hours. I could change the maximum storage lease. So you want to restrict the various applications from taking up too much storage. So again, you have the various quotas, but this is more about how long the data actually stays. It's more in terms of time, not the size. And you can either move to expired items or permanently delete. With expire, you have to go back in there and kind of restart things. The default quotas right now are unlimited. So how many VMs a user can store? So if you have multiple users in this on-demand environment right now, they can run an unlimited number. An individual user can run an unlimited number of VMs. However, of course, you can actually change that and say, well, it makes sense for someone to run 10, because if you recall, we are limited to in one of those VDCs earlier on when we saw that when we created the new VDC that you had 50 virtual machines allowed maximum in that VDC. Okay, so I'm going to revert back. I don't want to change anything at this point in time, but these are the other possibilities. Guest personalization is actually very important, because if you have Windows virtual machines, you can actually do domain joins, and then when you start up the machine, you can get DHCP addresses as well as all the other services from your domain server. So this is actually very important. We are using CentOS, so it doesn't apply to us, but in a real environment, you would have Windows servers more than likely, and of course the ability to just work it in exactly the same way as if it was an on-premise data center is hugely useful. And from an organization perspective, the metadata, they really don't let you change anything at this point in time. So let's not worry about that. Now, this is the organization aspect of the vCloud Director interface. As you can see, the virtual apps are there. These are the virtual machines, and again, all our apps have only one virtual machine running in them. We don't have any expired items because our leases never expire. But you could expire virtual apps, or you could expire templates for virtual apps from which you create virtual apps. This is something we have not seen before, the logs themselves. So this is really important to take a look at as well, because when you are doing vCloud Air networking, things can happen. So when we created our network and updated a network, you see this, right? So you have a log that actually tells you what has actually happened. So this is quite useful to us. Again, on demand, It's kind of limited. You basically get some kind of an idea as to when some event occurred, but that's the extent of it at this point. Uh, we again, this is really not part of networking, but again, we think going back a little bit, we have covered some of these. Organizations can have catalogs. You get a default catalog. You can add a new catalog to your organization as well. In you know, you have this, and then you can open this catalog. And of course, we have the CentOS machine that we've been using all the time. Public catalogs are provided by VMware in the vCloud Air environment. We've seen these before, and of course, we remember the Bitnami pieces of it as well. Going back a little bit to my cloud. Okay, so in this INE course organization, because you're looking at the organization, we look at the vApps in the cloud, and we just saw this. We go to home, and you have a different way of looking at it. You can add another vApp from a catalog. You can build a new vApp and put multiple virtual machines in that vApp. You can also add a vApp from OVF. I'm going to click on this because it's interesting. Recently, changes have been made to browsers from the viewpoint of security. So browser-based uploads and downloads are no longer available. It used too many options in Java that kind of opened up too many holes, is my understanding. So they have a new command line tool which is called OVF tool to upload or download files, and the instructions are available here. So if you have a need, and I'm sure you will at some point in time have a need to actually do this, to load your templates in here, that is one way to do it. The other way to do it would be to use the cloud connector product, vCloud connector product, which we have a separate section on, with which you can upload and download templates, and make sure your catalogs that are on premise are synchronized with the catalogs up on the cloud. Okay, so that's what we have here. We've covered vCloud Air networking in great depth here actually. We've looked at organization, we've looked at the organization VDC, then we've looked at the network, at the gateway there, then the network behind it. We've gone through the process of creating a new VDC, we've gone through the process of creating a new network and assigning different addresses to it. So with this, you should have a fair idea of the kind of templating that's been put in place for you, so that when you create a new VDC, you get a very standard templated network with very standard templated addresses, and then you can either change the private addresses there, or you can add new public addresses, or you can create completely new networks. It's very flexible. The only thing you can't do with the on-demand here, which is what we've been working on, is to create new gateways. But that doesn't mean that in the other versions of dedicated cloud and the multi-tenanted versions of vCloud Air, those kind of accounts, that you certainly are able to do that. So you can have multiple gateways connected to multiple external networks to provide you multiple paths out, which is obviously a very good thing. So with that, we are going to end this section on vCloud Air networking. We have a good background here to really understand how vCloud Director would work. So the next two sections are going to be behind the scenes with vCloud Director. I will first do a section on just the basics, and then we will do a section on the vCloud Director Advanced. So you have a really good idea whether you're working on vCloud Air on demand, or you're working on the dedicated or the multi-tenanted versions, how to best utilize the capabilities that are available behind the scenes to you when you manage your cloud through the vCloud Director interface.